Hello and welcome to another video from Napoleonic PC Wargamers using John Tiller's system again for a Napoleonic campaign, and this time it's going to be a proper job. What we're doing is a 1 versus 2, so there will be 3 players, one of us taking each of the armies. So one guy's taking the Anglo-Allied, one guy's taking the French, and I have got the short straw to a certain extent, and I've been lumbered with the Prussians. Not to worry. These 2 guys, that unlike my other opponent with other videos, these are seasoned players. We like to play historically accurate, sort of historians that play John Tiller rather than John Tiller players who like history, if you kind of see what I'm going. So we're going to play with our full house rules that I'm going to go through. We're going to play with a courier system that I will go through, an initiative and morale system that we're going to go into as well. Now, we've had endless discussions about how we want to play this, and I think, first of all, with the John Tiller game, it is fantastic, but we don't see it necessarily as a game. We see it as an engine that allows you to play out basically like a tabletop. This is your tabletop with your miniatures. It takes a lot of stuff out, or calculates it under the hood for you, so you don't have to waste your time doing it, firing and all that sort of stuff. But it does have its limitations. That's not to take anything away from it. It is a fantastic game. But there are 1 or 2 little potentially gamey aspects that we're not fond of, that could be added, and that's just us. So like I've said before in my videos, just because we play with house rules doesn't mean that we don't like the game. It's a fantastic engine, and we just add to it just because we want to enhance the historical realism. Now, you could go into a lot of depth with that, with pages and pages and pages of house rules. But the trouble is then it just becomes a chore, and you need to read 15 pages and sort of half an hour's reading for the sake of a few mouse clicks. So we've tried to keep it as simple as we can and get the maximum realism out at the same time. As I said, we've had numerous Zoom calls now, me and my 3 partners. I won't name them just because I haven't asked if they give me permission to at the start at the minute. And what we're playing is the Waterloo campaign, full campaign, no fixed units. That's just because we're not reenacting the 100 Days campaign. That wasn't the plan, to have all the battles of Ligny, of Courier, of Wavre. It was to use the map and the units and armies that were there to play a war game rather than reenact. And plus our courier system is going to slow stuff down. We've got movement restrictions. I'll go through all these house rules and stuff like that. So it's going to play out nice, slow, steady, hopefully quite realistic. Now, I'm not zooming out too much because one of the caveats of this is I'm not supposed to see the other allied army. Now, on the jump map, it's a given I'm going to have to from time to time, but I'm not going to pay any attention to the Anglo-Allies. Unless we can get our couriers and leaders, that I'll explain later, unless they can be within range of each other, I'm not going to pay any attention to them. So you might be thinking, oh, why doesn't he just go and have a look at the nearest units, and can they help you? No, we don't know that. We're assuming that I can't see anything other than what my core commanders can see, and then going to act accordingly. It's a big one. It's a 388 turn one, so I'm going to do videos all the way through it. I won't plan it as much overall at the minute, just because we're not supposed to have a big plan and know what the French are doing. Okay, we know where they arrive, and we're going to have to sort of deal with them first of all here at Charleroi. But other than that, it's all supposed to be a bit of a big unknown. That's realistic. That's what we're trying to do as much as possible. We're using the new Waterloo updates. However, because it's the campaign map, the campaign map didn't get the new update, so it does look the old style. I prefer the old style units, so I'll be using them. Our counters, the new counters are fantastic. There's a lot of hard work gone into them. However, we did discuss the fact that actually we don't want to see what our guard units are, or heavy cavalry, or pioneers and things like that. So we did change all our counters just to reflect infantry, cavalry and artillery. That goes across the board. I've done some NATO ones, and I just prefer my silhouettes for black powder games. So we won't know, according to the new system, which you would know what are guard units, etc., etc. It's just going to be generic units. That was part of the realism again. You might not necessarily know in real life when you spot a unit what those units actually are. Now, they're probably pretty adept at doing that in real life, but we just said no, it's better that we don't have that across the board. Other than that, I'm going to go through the house rules, I'm going to go through the courier system, and I'm going to go through the initiative as well. And it's quite in depth, but I will try to explain it, and I think once we start playing, for the first couple of turns, I'll always back up what I'm doing with the house rules and why I'm actually doing it. One of the first things we looked at was stacking, and the fact that, okay, John's other system has limitations for stacking, but it is quite liberal. If we were to look at a 100 by 100 meter hex and treat it as a hex rather than a square, we're looking at around, I think it's 8,800 square meters per hex. Now, that's not a lot of space. It does sound like you could get a lot of people and supplies and equipment and men and horses in that space, but that's suggesting that they are all lined up nicely, spread out evenly apart, and it wasn't like that. So when they were on the march, we initially said, okay, you have to have one unit per hex, that's all you're allowed, but even that wasn't enough space. When they're strung out on a march on a road, what we've said is you must have only one unit per hex, and you must have one clear hex in between each consecutive unit. The only time that doesn't count is if you've got supply wagons or artillery. We can assume that they sort of move to the side of the road, and then they can sort of nip in there. So we're not allowed to, when we're marching on the road, we only have to have one unit per hex and one clear space between. Doesn't matter if you're marching on fields, you can be adjacent and stuff like that because they can spread out. That's only specifically for roads and paths. So infantry stacking for combat itself, we said that I think it's 1800 limit is a little bit liberal again, and we discussed it and we came up with a figure of no more than 1300 infantry per hex. So this would be an illegal hex. There's far more than 1300 in there, and that's just to stop people blitzing and bunching up, and it's a little bit gamey, a little bit unrealistic. So we had a look into it and we came up with a figure of 1300. We also said that if any unit has more than 800, they must assume extended line formation. It's just a big bulky unit with more than 800, and it's a little bit unrealistic to have them. Okay, this is 700 in this case, but if we come up here, change to extended line, that's what you have to do. You have to change any unit of more than 800 into extended line. Now, to keep what we did also say, sorry, is that we can have units of less than 650 in one hex, because that would equal 1300, the limit, but it can be assumed that one is behind the other, as we have in this case here. So no more than 1300 infantry in one hex. Any unit more than 800 must go into extended line formation. We also decided that in a town or obstructed hex, like a forest or something, or an orchard, that infantry units must be present in column. Now, I'm not line, and we're not allowed to do square. The reason being, firepower that's available for a line formation in a town hex would be considerably unrealistic. Now, they're also in column. It's not realistic because you don't have sort of 360 arc of or range of fire to protect yourself. So, but the firepower from a column is more realistic than a line in a town hex. It'd all be fixed if John Tiller managed to get a sort of an open order formation. But we're saying to limit the firepower available in line formation. For our cavalry stacking limitations, first of all, we have to operate, or all cavalry operated in squadrons. So they didn't operate in one regiment. Even if it was a big regiment, they'd be broken down within that regiment into squadrons. So we said within one hex you're not allowed more than 300 cavalry, but just in case you've got some uneven units and squadrons, we did say there's a 5% allowance, so in any case no more than 315 cavalry in one hex. They need space to move. It's not all about just being able to line up and stay where you are in one hex. They need space to maneuver and such like. And yeah, so no more than 315 in any case cavalry in one hex, and they must operate always in squadrons. Okay, so you've got to break them down at the first opportunity if they're present, such as Waterloo in one regiment. You've got to break them down into squadrons. Artillery wise then, we ummed and ahed about this one, and to try and keep it as simple as possible, we came up with a few simple rules. Now, you cannot have any more than 8 guns in any hex. If you want more, you're going to have to spread them out into a larger battery over a couple of hexes. So no more than 8 guns in one hex. And when you're moving through a town, unless it's through a road or if you're moving through a forest or something, regardless of movement points, to simulate how difficult it was to push those guns through that type of terrain, they're only allowed to move one single hex if they're not on a road or a field or something like that. If you're setting up guns in a town or a forest or something like that, they have to be set up on the edge of the town. They wouldn't put them necessarily right in the middle of the town unless it's on a road hex. That's the only way you could do that. We couldn't put one, for example, here in this hex, but we could put them on here, or certainly this one, because there's a clear hex on either side of it, just to simulate that they put or set up their guns and unlimber their guns on the edge of towns. For skirmishers then, they because they seem to be very, very powerful, especially after the update, and especially when you put them in a town hex or something like that, they become extremely difficult to dislodge. So to that end, we said, well, realistically, would you have more than 2 skirmisher formations in one single hex? We said, no, you probably wouldn't. There's enough men there to do the job. So what we said is you're not allowed more than 2 skirmisher formations in any single hex. And they weren't always independent. Now, some formations were independent, but we're putting a sort of a blanket on it that they must be within 400 meters or 4 hexes of their parent unit to actually operate. You can't send a single formation to go and capture a victory point at the other edge of the map. That just wouldn't happen in real life. Whilst they did have some autonomy and independence, we're saying no, we'll try and keep them, or try to keep them at all times within 4 hexes of their parent unit. We also said that victory locations are important and they would be guarded. And as you capture villages and towns and stuff like that, you'd need to send or keep back a garrison. So we're saying that any victory location that has a direct effect on, or may have a direct effect, not every single VP on the map must be garrisoned. Only the ones within about 10 to 15 hexes of the area of operations that's going on, if you see what I mean. So if you capture a town or a village, you're going to have to leave maybe a skirmisher unit there, and as your army rolls forward, once that comes out of that 10 to 15 hex range, then you can bring that skirmisher back up and stuff like that. That's just to try and simulate the significance or the importance of actually holding and garrisoning, is that word, victory locations. Now, another thing we looked at was artillery supply. Now, in the Napoleonic titles, all artillery ammo comes from one central supply and just spread evenly across the map. Doesn't matter where your batteries are, everybody has a piece of it, and it's just all sort of done virtually under the hood. Just to stop people using artillery unrealistically and trying to keep it simple, we assume that artillery, especially your light guns and heavy guns, have to be supplied from a supply wagon. Now, has absolutely no effect in-game at all. However, we're trying to make it slightly more realistic, and we've said that a artillery battery, a light gun or a heavy gun, horse artillery is exempt. We assume that they had all their ammunition in case on with them. But a light gun and a heavy gun and howitzers must have a supply wagon within 4 hexes if it's not on a road, or within 10 hexes if it is next to a road or on a road hex. This just makes you think about artillery slightly more, and we assume that all artillery, apart from horse artillery which has everything, all artillery has 2 shots, 2 salvos, 2 turns worth of ammunition in case on. So if your supply wagons at the back of the pile, you can get them forward, and you might have to move them around and everything like that, but it just adds a little bit more realism to it, a little bit more historical accuracy, that rather than ammunition having to be brought to the front line every time or go back to collect it from a central reserve, your supply wagons have to be within 4 hexes on a non-road hex and 10 hexes within a road hex. Because of the Russian supply system, and they had massive sort of 500 unit supply, and they didn't have as many supply wagons, we're a little bit more liberal with that rule. It's very much a play within the spirit of that rule. It's very hard to enforce a lot of these rules, and especially this one, to check it. But you'll see as I go along, I'm always conscious of actually physically moving my supply wagons close to my artillery. It doesn't apply to fortresses and redoubts and things like that. We're assuming that they stockpiled ammo. We did think maybe 20 turns worth, but then it's trying to keep track of it and it gets a little bit too complex then. So yeah, fortresses and redoubts and stuff, we assume that they have stockpiled ammo and it doesn't apply to those. Now, chain of command is very important. And we do not play with the no detached melee rule. We like that rule in principle, but unfortunately in the game it's ever so slightly unrealistic, and there's a couple of little bits that make it unrealistic. For example, if you move a unit and they become detached but then move the leader straight away after, that unit still remains detached until the next turn and you can't do anything with it. So we actually cover this in our house rules. So in order to initiate an attack or a melee or something like that, the unit has to be within its command range. All commanders have to be within range of each other, brigade commander to division to corps, etc, etc. And that's just to make it as realistic as possible. Leaders are valuable. The chain of command must be kept at all times. And we can't use leaders unrealistically, you know, because they've got a large movement allowance. Some people I've seen tend to just use their leaders as scouts and go half the map in a couple of turns just to scout out the area, go and capture a VP or something like that. That would never happen. So everybody's got to remain as much as possible within their command range, and the same as the no detached melee rule. What we can do, or you have to do, is have a leader present or within the correct number of hexes in order to initiate a melee. We also have rules for disordered units, and we say that disordered units cannot initiate a melee or attack. They can still defensive fire, they can still offensive fire, because the game penalises them for that anyway. But if these troops here are disordered, for example, and I wanted to initiate a melee with them, what we're saying is if a commander, or the relevant commander, is in the same stack, so Blucher would have to physically be on this stack, or a leader would have to be in that stack, then he would rally them up, he would get small pockets together and actually be able to give some sort or initiate some sort of melee. It would be penalised by the game anyway, the game engine does that quite well. But in order for them to actually physically attack in that turn, a leader has to be in the same hex. Different rules for cavalry, just because they were slightly more free-thinking and independent. Cavalry can go around when they're disordered and attack. Now that, I say that with a caveat. If I was to initiate, no, they are overstacked, but if I was to initiate a charge with this cavalry, then they may become disordered in the first instance. We cannot attack then if they fail the disorder check. But every cavalry unit after every charge, or first initial charge, will become disordered. They are allowed to continue that charge. We're assuming that some of that squadron, or a couple of the troopers in that squadron, actually carried on and physically could be able to charge. Speaking of which, on cavalry charges, in order to initiate a cavalry charge, we said that troopers and squadrons would need space to actually initiate that. So we've said that you must keep one clear hex between you and the opponent that you want to charge, because that would give the cavalry space to form up, to start to trot, to start to canter, and then finally go into the charge. So we're saying that you need at least one clear hex between any unit that you want to charge. It gets you, we've tried it out, and it really does get you to use cavalry as cavalry was actually used. You can initiate a melee without charging on the adjacent hex, but you just cannot charge if you're right up next to somebody. Another rule we have refers to the combat effectiveness of units, and the fact that they weren't machines, that you can't fight often to the last man in most cases. And what we've said is that any unit that falls below 40% essentially becomes a defensive force. That they wouldn't be combat effective for the for offensive purposes. So any unit that becomes less than 40% up here, excluding any skirmishers that are out, we only use them as a defensive force. Now, sometimes a good leader, if he's present and then not disordered, then he might be able to rally them up and act in a sort of offensive capability. So if a leader's in the same hex, they're less than 40%, they can initiate small amounts of melees and stuff like that. It's a nice rule and principle, but one that's hardly used. But I might rotate my units off the line when they're 40%. However, if they're needed and I have a leader there, they can initiate a melee. Now, this rule does not apply to guard units. They will fight, or could fight, to the very last man, so they're actually exempt for this rule. Another rule we looked at was surrounding units and how that sort of goes in the game, because we're not playing phases and we have to sort of imagine these are simultaneous turns, we go, I go, you go, we go sort of thing, and not happening, okay, you do your turn, then I do my turn. If we manage to actually surround a unit on 5 sides, in the first case that this happens, let's say this happens this turn, I must leave one clear hex in order for them to have an escape route. Because it wouldn't happen in real life that you're surrounded, okay, I'm going to wait here, now it's my turn, then I'm going to move. These units would probably, hopefully, try to fight their way out and escape. So you have to leave one clear hex on the first instance that you surround a unit. Now if he does not decide to actually physically leave that hex on that turn, then we can bring in a 6th unit and surround him there. The annoying thing is you've tied down 6 units to destroy a couple of hundred line troops. However, it is covered in one of the optional rules that we've had a look at earlier on, so it's not too bad. Another rule we looked at was surrounding units and how that sort of goes in the game, because we're not playing phases and we have to sort of imagine these are simultaneous turns, we go, I go, you go, we go sort of thing, and not happening, okay, you do your turn, then I do my turn. If we manage to actually surround a unit on 5 sides, in the first case that this happens, let's say this happens this turn, I must leave one clear hex in order for them to have an escape route. Because it wouldn't happen in real life that you're surrounded, okay, I'm going to wait here, now it's my turn, then I'm going to move. These units would probably, hopefully, try to fight their way out and escape. So you have to leave one clear hex on the first instance that you surround a unit. Now if he does not decide to actually physically leave that hex, on that turn, then we can bring in a 6th unit and surround him there. The annoying thing is you've tied down 6 units to destroy a couple of hundred line troops. However, it is covered in one of the optional rules that we've had a look at earlier on, so it's not too bad. And may be the case that we manage to rout, destroy, or rout or disorder some units, and they end up behind our lines. Let's say these Frenchmen have routed behind our lines, and the next turn or two they sort themselves out. So let's just say they are unrouted and they sort themselves out. Now potentially the gamey aspect could be that, okay, I'm going to go on a little rampage, attack all his supply columns, capture victory locations and leaders, and just cause carnage and chaos behind the lines. That's very gamey. So what we've said is that this unit here, for example, has to make their best way back to their front line without any disruption or attacking to the opposing force. Now maybe the case sometimes you bump into stuff, that's absolutely fine. You can defensive fire if somebody comes towards you, you can't really help that anyway, but that's fine. However, you've got to basically try and go on a mission to get these troops back to your front line as best as possible, without causing any disruption to the opposing player. Very, very gamey thing, and I've seen it very often where people do that. They'll have a stack of units behind somebody's line, sort them all out, rest them up, and then go on the attack from behind. Absolutely annoying. The other little rules that we've got, because it's a campaign game, there's going to be night turns. We're not allowed to attack during the night, so any time that visibility becomes 1 hex, if we are facing off with each other on the field somewhere, we have to both retreat 1 hex. The only difference being that if we are occupying a victory location, then with that victory location, you can stay there, but your opponent must go back 1 hex. You can move during the night, however, you're not allowed to sort of gain ground. You could go outwards, backwards, but anything but forward to illegally, if you like, obtain any ground. So you can go forward, nope, but you can go to the side, to the flanks, and back again. No fighting during the night. So that's our house rules. They'll maybe make a bit more sense, as I said, as we're going through them and we're playing them. It's not to take away anything from the game itself. We're trying to keep it fun, and I think it will be. We get our fun from being historically accurate. But we also don't want to have a 25-page rulebook that we've got to check every time we want to click the mouse. So hopefully we've got a good compromise. Hopefully they make sense. And when you see them in action, for the first few turns certainly, hopefully you'll see why we've come to the conclusions we did. And I suppose the last little bit, just before we start, is to have a look at the optional rules that we're actually going to be playing with. We discussed these again in depth. Some of them you might not agree with, but I'll explain the sort of the trickier ones, if you like, and the conclusion that we came to and why we're choosing to play or not to play with them. Manual defence fire, well, that's obvious because we're not playing it in phases. It would just take far too long to do. Victory points for leader casualties, we discussed that one in depth. We think it is realistic because your leaders are valuable. If you've got them hung out on the front line, especially your sort of top commanders, then you deserve to have a points penalty for losing them. You shouldn't have them on the front line. Route limiting. Now, this was one that we find with it unchecked. The route check is incredibly harsh on the new update, and you can have double figures of battalions and units routing for the sake of just cavalry taking some skirmishes, for example. It's very, very heavy-handed. So essentially what route limiting does is if a unit routes with it unchecked, there is a high chance that adjacent units or units in the vicinity will also route, and you can have mass routes. I like the idea in principle of that rule, however it's just a little bit too heavy-handed, which makes it unrealistic. So with route limiting, it will only be one unit that essentially routes. Isolation rules, that's a given. If the units are isolated, they're going to have an attack and defence penalty. Optional fire results, I've discussed that one before. It's a lot more unpredictable with it unchecked. With optional fire and melee results both checked, it tends to be a lot more uniform, a lot more sort of middle of the dice roll. However, with it unchecked, you can get some nice extremes one way or the other, so we're going to play with that. Melee terrain modifiers, well, that's a given. If you're going to melee somebody in the town or something like that, you're going to get a defensive bonus or an offensive penalty. That's sort of a given. Column pass-through fire and target density modifier. Well, yep, if you've got a load of infantry or units all stacked up, those cannonballs are going to take more of them. No retreat overruns. If a unit is going to retreat with it unchecked, that means that if there's some skirmishers in the way or something like that, that unit will fight their way out and potentially not be blocked in. So it's going to help with that surrounding rule that you're absolutely desperate. Those units are going to try their best to fight their way out, and if there's some skirmishers there standing in the way, they're going to potentially overrun them and get them out of the way. Movement threat disorder, well, yeah, we denied about that one. It can be a little bit heavy-handed as well, but if your units are fatigued and they're low quality, you haven't got your leadership sorted out, and you're moving towards, and they're low grade and they're moving towards another unit, they were going to have to go through this disorder check. Zone of control, yeah. Partial retreats, no. Line movement restriction, they didn't move around in line, so that's a given. It's a given that they're going to use that and get penalised for it. Flank morale modifier as well, you've got to protect your flanks. I'm not entirely sure though if that's behind as well or just on the flanks of a unit. However, we're going to play with that because it's more realistic. Optional melee results, same as optional fire results. Multiple cavalry melees. Yep, cavalry can continue to go on the charge. That momentum, and especially because we've got that one hex in between on initiating a charge, that momentum would carry them through. So we were saying, yep, you can have multiple cavalry melees. Multiple infantry melees, we talked about it, we discussed it. but it's potentially a little bit gamey to have multiple infantry melees on. We talked about how you could actually set up 3 battalions all sort of in a line, and each one of them has a go in turn, and then a 15-minute turn. I don't think it's realistic enough to organise that. The opportunity fire against skirmishers. Take the French style, 2 skirmishers, 1 firing, 1 reloading. They're going and ducking behind cover and moving. We're not going to waste time with opportunity fire against skirmishers. No melee eliminations. That's to help with that surrounding rule. So with that unchecked, then we can melee a surrounded unit and hopefully overrun them. We'll have a higher chance of overrunning them rather than tying down 5-6 units to deal with surrounded unit. And the no detached melee rule, discussed it, we have this covered in our house rule. It's a lovely rule in principle, it is realistic, it's a fantastic rule, but unfortunately the game engine just has 1 or 2 little things that take it away. But we, as I said, we do play with that, but just covered in our house rules. So we have a look at the Courier system in a little bit more detail. We're trying to simulate the fog of war here, and the fact that the John Tiller games allow you to basically see everything in a bird's eye view. If you have a drone, everybody can see what everybody else can see on the Allies side. So we're trying to keep it as realistic as possible. I'm not going to look at the British as I've mentioned before. And we're keeping the courier system to a core level, and they're going to be virtual couriers. We don't actually physically have to send out a unit, and we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Now there are so many variables that could come into play. Messages might not arrive, they might arrive quick, they might arrive slowly, there might be miscommunication. We could go into a hell of a lot of detail with it, so we've kept it as simple as possible. And a commander or a field commander on the day, such as Blucher or Wellington, and the French and Napoleon, they're only going to communicate to their core commanders. There are certain little caveats to that, but essentially the courier system is at a core level, and for scouts, but we'll cover that in a second. Now what we've done is we've said, right, if Blucher, or initially we're allowed to have 1 set of standing orders. So the French, when they arrive on the field, it will be assumed that they still have their sort of pre-game orders, if you like, so they know where to go as their general plan. Same with the Allies. To each nation, the Prussians have their own set of standing orders, and the Allied army has their own set of standing orders with, you know, how you're going to defend. You can't get too far into it, you know, the whole campaign, do this, do that. It's pretty much how you're going to start on the game. So let's say now, what we've got here is we've got Blucher. Okay, so Blucher's up here, close to Bothay, and he wants to send a message all the way down here, keep going, to Thielemann and his 3rd Corps. What we'll do is we're going to count the hexes in between in a straight line distance. We haven't gone over obstructed hexes. God, I cannot speak today. We've just taken it as a hex full stop. Now because these are 15-minute turns, we've said that a courier on average would go 2 kilometers during a 15-minute turn. They're going to ride fast, they'll be the fastest horses, etc, etc. If it's a 10-minute game, we'll say 14 kilometers, but we're going to keep it to 20 hexes for this game. So in a straight line distance, doesn't matter if it's a road going through a forest and fields or what have you, in a straight line distance we're going to count the hexes. So literally 1, 2, 3, go, etc, etc. Let's say for the purpose of this is 40 hexes. I'm not going to bother counting them out, it'll be a bit slow and boring. Let's say it's 40 hexes. Now we've done a bespoke courier program that allows us to record it. It's not so much to see at the end of it, did you actually send that message, etc, etc. It's to remind us in 10, 15, 20 turns, what did I actually send out to who? So you can see we've got a message number and we've got a turn number. We've got a little drop down box with who's actually sending the message out, who it's to. We can put in the hex location as well, I won't bother doing that. And then we can put that total distance in. Now we said 40 hexes. Then we get a predicted ETA, so it's going to take 2 turns in order for that message to arrive. So we have to sit tight, pretend that message hasn't arrived, and we can't do anything until it has. And then we decided we needed a variable. to take into account, they might, well, they often didn't find the recipient until much later. They got lost, they'd have to stop and ask where's so-and-so, etc, etc, etc. So what we've decided to do is roll a 20-sided dice, which would equate to a maximum of another turn, and then add that to that ETA. So let's say we rolled, I don't know, a 13, unlucky for some. Now we can see it was going to take 2 turns, but this roll of 13 adds essentially 13 hexes to the total distance. And you might think, well, that's always, sometimes they may have found them sooner. Okay, so what we've done with this predicted final ETA is we're going to round up from 2.5 and round down from 0.5. So this is 2.65 turns, and because it might take a little bit longer, we're going to call that 3 turns. So if it was 2.49, it would actually be 2 turns. So it does work both ways. So that's what we've tried to do with this courier system. We tried to keep the messages as simple as possible, so we've created this courier system based on some of the games that use it. Scourge of War uses one, Campaigns on the Danube sort of uses one, and what we've tried to do is keep it simple, drop down boxes. We can come here and create a message. So let's say, I don't know, act, I'm just going to write any old message. Act condition is poor. I'm just going to put anything in here for the sake of it. Okay. And if we come over here, we can see now that the message is, okay, it doesn't make any sense at all. But the other one that I did earlier was new orders, general advance. You should advance to contact, adopt a defensive posture, scout area ahead of you. And we can also put in additional things. I don't know, save artillery ammo or whatever it might be. The idea being is we don't want to be too comprehensive with our orders and make them so detailed, because potentially, I suppose, the Anglo-Allies may have had very detailed messages, but we tried to keep it as simple as possible, because don't forget, by the time that message arrives, the situation may have changed as well. We're going to do the same thing for scouts as well. So if a scout bumps into, I don't know, somebody on the move, the French on the move, for example, they are also going to have to send a courier message. It's not going to be assumed that message, they instantly tell their corps commander, oh yeah, this is what we've seen. So that's also going to work for scouts. The other thing is, let's say a message takes 2 turns to arrive, it will arrive on the end of the 2nd turn. So therefore you couldn't actually act on the orders until the start of the next turn. Otherwise it would just be 1 turn. That's sort of common sense, I hope. So that's the courier system. We try to keep it as simple as possible. Hopefully it'll work. As we go, you'll see all the messages I create. And then how we time it all, and hopefully it'll work. Don't forget, it is the first time we've piloted it, so there may be a couple of little bits that you think, oh, that doesn't work. I might think the same. It is a pilot trial version of this courier system. Now, another little thing we decided, we talked about and tried, we discussed, was initiative checks for corps commanders only, not going down to division level, just for corps commanders. It may be the case that you're waiting orders, or the orders are outdated, and the situation in front of this commander, or corps commander, is changing, and he has to adapt. Now, by the letter of the spirit that we're trying to play with, where orders you have to carry them out to the best of your ability and to the spirit of the order, rather than trying to sort of just use your own personal initiative. This is military gaming, so we have to be fairly regimented. However, we decided to have an initiative check for all our corps commanders, based on how likely they were to perhaps act on their own and disregard or amend orders on the day. Not so much their ability of their commander, though we sort of did discuss it a little bit. It's more to do with how likely were they to completely disregard any orders, like the Prince of Orange did at Cote d'Ivoire, or strictly say, no, I have to follow these orders. So everyone will have an initiative rating, and I'll go through them at the start of the game on turn 1. If we take Push with his second corps, I've given him a rating of 3 just because he was fairly regimented. He wouldn't really act upon his own initiative as such, so we've given him quite a low initiative rating. Does go up to 12 because we're going to use a 12-sided dice, but I think when we discussed all the corps commanders, nobody came close to 12. I think 7 or 8 was the most for the people like Ney and stuff like that. So what we've done is say, right, you have the same amount of initiative rolls as your initiative rating. So Pierce would have up to 3 rolls per day, and you roll a 12-sided dice. If it's the same number or lower than his initiative rating, then he is allowed to amend or disregard his orders and act accordingly to the situation in front of him. He will also then lose one of his initiative points, if you like, and it'll go down to 2 the next time and 1, and so on and so on. We've said it will reset at midnight, so Pierce will get 3 again the next day after midnight, just to take into account that, you know, they'll rest, they'll recuperate, and it sort of resets again. So if Pierce was here, let's say defending Maze, and Blucher is, what would we say, about 2 turns away, the orders come through and he says on the march, but the French are in Villers, for example. We can roll an initiative check. As long as it's lower than Pierce's 3, we can amend those orders and stay and fight and act accordingly. So hopefully it'll add an extra little element. We don't have to roll at all, and if you fail the initiative check, you just have to wait until next turn to do it. You can't just keep rolling and rolling until you get it on the day, on that turn. So hopefully that will add to a little bit of realism to it. But we'll wait until it actually comes up, and I guarantee it will come up at some point in the game. So finally, we can actually have a look at what we're actually dealing with now. So as I said, it's the full campaign. One of us is taking each army, and I am the Prussians. And I've got 3 Prussian corps in the field, and hopefully von Bülow is going to come with his 4th corps later on. Up in the north, I've got some dregs, if you like, or the main part actually of my 2nd corps, and I need to get them down to into the game. Basically, they're way up here. They need to be down in the action somewhere. Now I'm going to get a message off to Wellington to tell them what I'm going to do, so we'll see the Courier bit for that. But I'm going to have to get these guys all marching down. Blucher is here with Pierce and the remainder of the 2nd corps, which will place things on there around Bothay and Maze, and they're going to have to get involved as well. Prussian troops now were actually quite good. There were some decent units. Okay, they're not. Annoyingly, I'm going to have to get used to using sort of brigades rather than divisions. And down here as well, we need to get these guys in our 3rd corps with Thielemann, and we have to get them as well. So they're down in the southeast. And around Charleroi itself and Châtelet, we've got the 2nd corps with who we got down. Sorry, 1st corps with must be Zeitung, yeah. So I'm going to have to think about what to do with these guys. Now it's going to be a 388 turn monster. I doubt we're going to get that far. I'm not going to zoom in on any of my allies. Jump map is fine. We've discussed it. Is it realistic? Is it not? We can't really help it. I'm not going to be scrolling every time I want to go off and have a look at the remainder of the 2nd corps. But I'm not going to zoom in. I'm pretending I don't know anything. But we do have a general idea of dispositions because we've had a pre-battle discussion type thing. So the other thing is, by posting this on YouTube, many people will ask, well, surely my French opponent will just watch this video and be able to see exactly what we're doing. He won't. He's a serious player. He won't do it because it will ruin the experience for him. It will ruin the experience for us, and he just wouldn't do it. Temptation would be there for him to do it. I certainly wouldn't do it if I was in his shoes. And as much as possible, communication is going to be realistic using the Courier system. So even my allied opponent, we're sending the turns and stuff back and forward, but until that Courier would arrive in game, I'm not going to tell him my plans, what I'm doing or anything like that. It's going to all be done by this virtual courier system. So we're trying to make it as realistic as possible. We've got rules for marching, we've got rules for initiative, and hopefully it's going to be a very nice, almost historic war game. Again, it's not a reenactment, so don't be thinking, oh, Contrebras, Ligny, Wavre, we're going to have battles there. It's just going to be as it is in front of us. As soon as turn one is done, it becomes ahistorical anyway. So sit back, hopefully you enjoy it. I know this is quite a long video with explaining everything. It will be a slower series of videos. You know, this is going to take us months to complete, and every few turns with a video about 20 minutes or so, something like that. I will send it on and post it on YouTube. Do appreciate all comments, so please do comment, advice, what you think works, what you think doesn't work, anything we should do. Everything is welcome. Everything is welcome. So that's the turn, or first turn done. It's first cycle. The French have gone, the Anglo allies have gone, and my partner has passed it over to me to play as the Prussians. So I'm going to ignore the jump map's not too bad. I really don't care about his dispositions. I need it to move around such a large map rather than scroll. And if we have a look, first actions then, or first engagements around Charleroi, we have got some troops that we're going to have to deal with, some French that we're going to have to deal with. Now, if I have a look at my courier system, I've already given some standing orders. The agreement was that each corps could have general standing orders at the beginning, so they're not just sort of sat there waiting for turn upon turn for something to do, because we know that the Prussians are going to have to deal with the French in the first couple of turns. So I filled it all out. Message number 1, turn number 0, so it was done before. Field Marshal Blücher, with his hex location to Zeitung in the first corps, down towards Charleroi. I told him that he has new orders to defend, hold or defend, adopt a defensive posture ahead of him, be cautious, and I request a status report in 5 turns. So just having a look here, Zeitung is around Charleroi. Let me just put leaders on top. I've forgotten where he is already now. That's in there, yeah. Let's have a look at what Zeitung actually has. So he has got the first corps around Charleroi and around Châtelet. I've told him to perform a delaying action as much as possible around Charleroi and Châtelet, and he's got some sort of dispersed corps there to the east, around the forest there and the Sambre River. And we've got, who have we got here? So these guys are going to stay, there we go. The 1st Infantry Brigade and the Reserve Cavalry are going to stay on that road towards Contrebras, because my sort of secondary order to Zeitung was perform a delay in action at Charleroi and Châtelet, move remainder of corps towards Fleurus. Oh, terrible, Fleurus. So around Châtelet and Charleroi, they're going to perform a delaying action. That's all the information we've got. The rest of the corps, including these troops here and all this sort of dispersed troops around the river here, this kink in the river, they're going to cross and they've got to go up towards, where are we? Fleurus here. So they're going to get on the march, and in 5 turns I've got to go about, at the minute, the distance is 172 hexes between Zeitung and Blücher, and send them a situation report. So that's the first use of the actual courier system for the first corps. If we have a look at Thielemann's 3rd corps, over here, can't remember where Thielemann's is exactly, but he's here somewhere. There we go. So he's got his 3rd corps in action right in the southeast corner of the map. I don't want them to get involved, so my initial standing orders to Thielemann were, there we go. So Thielemann, 3rd corps in this hex. Sorry, that should be Blücher. So change that to Field Marshal Blücher. New orders, general advance with all haste, do not engage and be cautious. Move the whole corps towards, or whole corps towards Ligny. And that's what I'm planning to do, unless the French get in the way in the meantime. And then I might have to think about an initiative roll. I'm going to get this whole corps on the march up towards Ligny. Now Blucher is here just to the east of Ligny, and Pierce is also here with the 2nd Army Corps. However, there is also the remainder of the 2nd Army Corps up towards the north. So it's assumed, we have discussed this because they are so far away, that they're going to march, or allowed to march from wherever they've been told to go towards Ligny. However, but just to show you how we're going to do this courier system and how simple we're trying to keep it. So we've got Pierce and Blucher in the same hex, but just for clarity's sake, or for ease of use if you like, it's the 3rd message. It was a standing order, so it would be before. It goes from Blucher in 520 252, same, and we said it's going to Pierce in the 2nd Corps, and he's also in 520 307. There is no distance to cover, so we don't have to do that. He's in the same hex and it's a standing order anyway. And this is going to be new orders, so we can go down here, find new orders. If I press N, does it go to N? No. So new orders, it's going to be pretty much the same. Where are we? General advance. I'll keep it that. It's simple. They're just going to go straight towards Ligny. New orders, general advance. Move whole corps to Ligny. And then I think I've got one that says await my orders. So once you arrive there, await my orders. So that's what they're going to do. He's going to move his whole corps towards Ligny because Blucher might not be in the same hex, or he won't be in the same hex. The plan was that we're going to have to meet up with Wellington, and we have pre-calculated. Wellington at the moment is still in Brussels, and he's 115 hexes away from Blucher. So what we can do is say, so message number 4, turn 1, Field Marshal Blucher in 520 252 to the Duke of Wellington. And well, he's just in Brussels, right? Which Brussels doesn't have a hex. The total distance was 172, so predicted ETA is 9 turns. Remember, we're rounding up. However, we've got to roll a 20-sided dice to see how many hexes we're going to add to that total distance. So you can't see this, but I've got it on my phone here, and if I give my phone a shake, just you can get a little app that has dices on it. We've got 12-sided dice and a 20-sided dice for this, and I get 12. So we get 12 additional hexes added to it, and a predicted ETA of 9.2. Because we're rounding down from 0.5, that means it's 9 turns before he'll receive this message. If it's 9.5, we round up, it would be 10 turns, just to add a little bit of variation to the courier system. So it's not orders, obviously, so it's just going to be additional information. Holding action at Charles, how do you spell it? Charleroi and Châtelet. Moving corps to Ligny, or moving 2 corps. Moving 2 corps to Ligny. Await further information. So we can send that off, and after 9 turns, I can actually give that order by an email to my Anglo-Allied partner. So holding action at Charleroi and Châtelet, moving 2 corps to Ligny, await further information. And I will keep sending him stuff until he arrives on the field, and we can actually get on and be able to do stuff. Now, just having a look here, and the house rules that we're going to adopt, I'm going to have to sort any cavalry out that are more than 300. I've got some cavalry here. Yeah, definitely these big regiments, they're going to have to be broken down, so it's going to be a little bit boring watching me do that. This whole remainder of 2nd Corps are going to march south towards Ligny down here. And then it's going to be slow and steady because we've got to break off or keep one hex in between each regiment, each a couple of squadrons, and each battalion of infantry, just to simulate them strung out on the march. So the marches are going to be slow, they're going to be steady, it's going to be boring watching me, so I'll do all that sort of behind the scenes. Again, also with Tielemann's Corps, this 3rd Corps, it's going to be the same. I'm going to break cavalry down where it's needed to be broken down, they're not too bad. So break them down as needed, and then get them on the road, probably split them up a little bit, and get them on the march on the road north, and then sort of go behind what's of 2nd Corps here, maybe up the road here. Yeah, I think I will split them up between these two roads towards Boigny, and then towards Ligny. Tielemann's Corps though, we're going to get the odds and sods that are in this area around here on the march as well, probably through this road in the woods. Possibly consider getting some of these guys down towards Colbar. Link up then with the reserve cavalry and the 1st Infantry Brigade, and then have a look how we can actually hold or perform this delaying action at Charleroi and Châtelet. Move the guns closer to the bridge. Now the bridges are big, old, heavy 600 stone bridges, so I did think about blowing them, but that means getting artillery pretty much right up there, which is not a bad idea anyway to perform a delay in action, and then blowing it. But the trouble is then you waste that shot blowing the bridge rather than firing upon anything that's around. So we've got 2 bridges to deal with at Charleroi, but then down here we also have French probably arriving down here, so we have to cover that as well. Now it's only a holding action, and I could use an initiative check. I mean, a holding action, it wasn't fight to the last man, the order, and I purposely put that. It was be cautious, adopt a defensive posture, so it's not fight to the last man, it is a delaying action. This is a long campaign game, and I have to save my troops for when the Allies and I, if and when we get together for a decider. As I said, it's not a historical campaign, we're not reenacting it, it is going to be purely with 3 armies on 1 map, and that's it. We're playing it as a war game. So, I'm going to sign off for a second, and then well, probably be more than a second by the time I've actually broken everything down and moved, and then get back to you before the end of the turn. So there was a lot of movement for that turn, and breaking stuff down and getting stuff on the march. So just to sort of explain what I did, we have to have that one clear hex on a road for everything in March. So as you can see here, everything has 1 clear hex. The only time I haven't followed it, and it's using a little bit of initiative, okay, I have here, but other places where I've got all these Prussian Jägertets and excuse me, Russian formations of skirmishers, independent skirmisher units and things like that, I haven't kept to it then, just because there's 75, 100 units. That's going against what we're trying to do. It's when you've got these massive sort of 7, 8, 900, or sometimes the Austrians, 1,000 unit battalions that are on a road all clumped up. So that's what we're trying to do. That's the spirit of the rule. We don't have to keep to it if you're not on a road. So I've split all my cavalry into squadrons. Now, I know some people don't like to do it. I've gone through it a million times. For me, and for us, cavalry operated in squadrons, full stop. Even if you've got them present as 1 regiment of, let's say, 300 in this case for these hussars, and I put them together, and they operated as 1 stack. I'll show you what I mean. If I was to put them back into, I don't know with their parent unit, but if I was to put them back into 1 unit of 300, even in my head, they would still be broken down within that. So you see, what I'm trying to say is they operate in squadrons, full stop, for us anyway. But we can march side by side on fields and things like that, and you can clump up as much as you want, still keeping to the 300 cavalry per hex rule. But just on the road you have to have one clear hex. So this, for example, is not an illegal move. If it was on the road, it would be an illegal move. So that's the second corps marching down from the north up here. So I'm trying not to use the jump map apart from to move, which we've got to do. The rest of the second corps is marching towards Ligny with Blucher. And here we can see we've got these skirmishers here. There's only a couple of hundred men on the road. It's well within the spirit of the rule to avoid sort of overstacking and stuff like that. Who have we got here? We've got Tielemann's third corps. He is getting on the march. There's going to be a little bit of a bottleneck as troops, what I've noticed here with this, but that doesn't matter, that would happen in real life. As they're going through Gemep and Freumont, there's going to be a little bit of a bottleneck until they get on this road. I accidentally put Tielemmann way up there just because I fast moved him. Annoying. It wasn't to scout or anything like that because I know the French aren't there. It's just really annoying because that goes against the spirit of the rules, and we've got fog of war on, so I can't undo that. So a little bit pissed off with myself that I did that, but I will forever making mistakes with fast moving, just holding out and right click, and then troops get disordered because they go through fields and cities and towns and stuff like that. It's a habit I'm trying to break. So these guys, they're all bunched up on the road. I'm not going to move them back to get that one hex space in between on the road. Again, they'd all be ready, getting ready to march. So I'm happy with that. My cavalry down here, I'm not going to scout anything south. Their order was to go up towards Ligny and Flores, so that's what I've done. I've split them all down into squadrons again, and they're all slowly going to make their way north over the river, join up with the tail end of the third corps, and then eventually up to Flores. So is that somewhere here? Okay. Zeitung's first corps, we are so I'm not going to call them waifs and strays, but the odds and ends that were out towards the east from Châtelet and Charleroi, I've got them on the move, using the same principles on the road hex here. We can bunch up, not bunch up, but the rule doesn't apply to artillery, and it doesn't apply to supply wagons, just because they'd move out the road, let people through, or vice versa, or infantry would let them through. So it only applies to infantry and cavalry stacks, basically. So they are on the move. They are to go up towards Flores. I'm just double check that, just to make sure. Move towards Flores. Yeah, it was. Okay, good. Châtelet itself then, they've got this rule that if you're using infantry in line, if they're more than 800, they have to go in, or sorry, more than 650 it is, they have to go into extended line. And I can only go into line formation in any hex that isn't obstructed, in an open hex or field. Can't do it in towns, can't do it in forests and orchards and stuff like that, so that's why I've had to put these troops into column. Limbered some artillery up. I might try and blow this bridge because it will delay them. Again, it's a big old 600 bridge. In any case, I want to bring my artillery a lot closer to that bridge because it's a bottleneck, and hopefully with the no optional melee or fire results in this case, we can get some good hits if they decide to actually come towards Châtelet. And because all I've got here is pioneers. As soon as I see the French, it's a delay in action. I'm going to have to get Zeitung out of there and then join up with the rest of his corps. Around Charleroi itself, very much the same principle. I've limbered up any artillery that was on the high ground because I think it would be more effective actually at the bridges itself. Now we can only remember have artillery in a town hex on the edge of a town hex. So for example, let's go up here. In the middle on this hex here, I couldn't put any artillery. We're not allowed to do that. It has to be on the edge because that would simulate that it is physically on the edge of the hex, overlooking or outside the town, because you'd have the space for the guns then. So that was the thinking behind that rule. Again, I had to move some troops around because they were in line. Oh, there we go, in the woods. They can't be in line in the woods. Had to. They're 667, so they're going to have to break off. That's annoying. Unless, yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll put some more skirmishers out just to get them less. I'll put some skirmishers this side of the river, just because they're very strong skirmishers in this case. And what I did notice, having a look here, this is guard cavalry. That's some chasseurs cheval of the guard. And there's some pioneers, some hussars he's got. A lot of hussars. So it's going to be hard for him, if that's all I can see at the minute. What's he got there? Some lancers, several leisure lancers. Okay, so I'm not too worried about that. It's hard to take a bridge with cavalry, especially if I'm getting artillery there and I've got skirmishers and he's got to attack a town hex. It's going to be quite difficult for him. Remember, this is only a delay in action. Don't expect me to, or I'm not expecting myself to hold Charleroi at all costs. It's very much just to give everybody a chance to get on the march and start to form up into one mass. That's my plan, because that's what Napoleon would do. And this guy that I'm playing, I know he's a very organised and tidy player. He'll want to pick us off or core off one by one. The plan is, when I meet up with Wellington eventually, when he's on the map and we get Wellington and Blucher in the same hex, and we can have that Zoom call. We can have that Zoom call for hours to discuss the finer points of what's in front of us. But until then, my plan is, for the Prussians at least, is to find a location on the map. At the minute, Ligny's a nice sort of gathering point to get together en masse. I think that's the only way we've realistically got for fighting the French, because I know my opponent. I play him all the time. I've been playing him for months and months and months. We've played loads of campaigns. I know how he operates. He's a very smart, he's a very tidy player. This will be chalk and cheese with against Talavera, the AI, and the other two videos against my other opponent, who just goes all guns blazing. This will be very much a proper, prim and proper game, if we want a better word. Now, coming down here, there isn't really a place, but to protect my right flank or west flank for Charleroi, I know these guys are 800, but I moved them into line. I've got to put them in extended line next. That's fine. It's not an infraction of the rule. Well, it is by letter of the law, but come on, it's in the spirit. I know I've got to do it. I don't have enough points to actually physically do it this turn. Put some skirmishers in this town, and he's going to have some French coming up here at some point, and all they can do is delay to try and protect the main body of the infantry that's down here. So that's all I can really do. Going up from Charleroi, 1st Infantry Brigade and my reserve cavalry, I split them all into squadrons as well. I'm not planning to use them, maybe as a rear guard if the French break through in any force, but that's about it. I did bring some artillery, some divisional artillery is going to come down just to bolster and possibly blow the bridges. I should have really put something in my starting messages for that, but I'm going to try and play it properly and not adjust it for what I see. My orders were to hold, not to blow the bridges or anything like that. I could use an initiative roll for it, I suppose. That's not bad, but Zeitung's only got 3 for his initiative, so I'm going to use them sparingly for him. So that's the situation at the end of turn 1. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be played properly, as a proper war game as much as possible. Remember what I said, we're using a John Tiller engine to simulate 160, so there's too many in there, to simulate a war game, rather than just, I didn't got cavalry everywhere. Break that down into squadrons, 150, 150, you can go forward, what's left, and get that artillery out as well. Yeah, so we're using the John Tiller engine to essentially simulate a war game. I'm really looking forward to it, really am looking forward to it. Blucher's there, I've got a load of supply wagons, my supply train, they're going to move somewhere safe where they're protected on the edge of the map. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, with the courier system, with the initiative system, with the house rules that we've got, the couple that we've added, and there we go. It's going to be a good one. I wonder if I can move some of them on the road as well. No, I'm going to keep it as it is. So leave your comments if you're looking forward to this one. I know I am. And it is over to the French.